have two more presentations and one more film to show you. First, we are really happy to have back Camille Intson, who had a couple of years ago a workshop at Dr. College here, and now she's going to talk about her personal project on their family history. Camille is an award-winning Canadian multidisciplinary artist and researcher whose practice spans writing, performance, photography, music, and new media. Her recent projects include the LP Poems in the Ashes, Death of the Prometheans, emerging playwright in development with Studio 180 Theatre, Clickbush Train Bar at Taravan Theatre last year, Jane at Pantheon Projects last year, again at Taravan Theatre, Troubadour in 22, Colleen Peterson Songwriter Award, and so on and so forth. The list is long already, although she's so young yet. And today she's teaching at Toronto Metropolitan University and UT also. So Camille, please. Okay, let me just get my setup here. Is this okay? Can everyone hear me? That's great. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Camille. Thank you, Pierre, for that lovely introduction and for inviting me here today to speak with all of you. As she said, I'm a multidisciplinary artist, lecturer, and researcher based here in Toronto, and my art and research practice spans writing, performance, music, emerging technology, and new media, and I'm also a PhD candidate within the University of Toronto's Faculty of Information, where I will be defending my dissertation next summer. So I guess that means I will be a doctor soon, but certainly not one you'll want to have around in any sort of medical emergency, so please keep that in mind. I'm also, most pertinently, and this is where I reveal my age with some anxiety, I'm a third generation Estonian Canadian, so I'm representing for the third generation.
You're young.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, thank you. 3 of my grandparents and their families were refugees of the Great Escape, and they were, on my father's side, the Intsons, who were based in Viljandi and in Pärnu before fleeing into the Baltic Sea in 1944. On my mom's side, the Ramos, that's my grandfather, Erik, right there, his siblings Ingrid, Gusta, and Ivar, who is still alive, and his parents Alfons and Marguerite. And then there are the Haliastes, who were actually the Grünbergs before the Estonianization campaign in the 30s, where lots of people changed their names to reflect Estonia's new freedom. And that would be my grandmother, Helen, her brother, Voli, and her parents, Johan and Anna. Now, my grandmother, Helen Ramo, with whom I think I share an uncanny amount of physical features, yes, was very, very close to me before she passed away in 2013. I always say that she was the first person who understood that I was an artist, who taught me countless songs in Estonian and Russian and German when I was a kid, and who fed me pirokat and klimbi soup and kringel, and who encouraged me to write and create from a very, very young age. And she was born in 1921 in Nömme, which is just outside of Tallinn, and she died in August of 2013 when I was about 16 years old. So, why am I giving you this extended family history? Well, it actually forms the basis of my talk today, because when my grandmother died, my mother and I inherited boxes and boxes upon boxes of old photos and scrapbooks and documents and other ephemera that began with the interwar period in Estonia, so between the First and Second World Wars, and ended with her life in the early 2010s. It also chronicled a trip that she took back to Estonia in the year 1990, and that's what that photo there is. Right before Estonia regained its independence, she went back to visit, to retrace her steps and visit all of the homes that she lived in and left, and visit old family and friends and walk through the neighborhoods that she used to go to in her youth. And though my mother and I knew a decent amount about the circumstances that led to her relocation in Canada, we'd been told the story countless times, there were a lot of gaps in our understanding. We didn't understand why her father was deported to and executed in Siberia, but the rest of the family was untouched. We didn't understand what her life was like back in Estonia, because she never really talked about it in that specific detail. Where were some of these photos that we had now inherited taken, and who were some of the people in them? Also, these photos reaffirmed to us that she had this whole other life that we knew next to nothing about, and that we were, in a sense, protected from. You know, at first I wondered why so many of these captions in her photo scrapbooks were in English, because Estonian was her first language, the one that she always spoke at home to my mother and to her husband and to everyone in our family. And it didn't make sense to me that her inclination was to write her memoirs in English. But eventually I think I understood that the records were for her, yes, but they were also for me, who didn't speak a ton of Estonian growing up, although my opinions detailed right now. Thank you. I know some ridiculous phrases and I know how to describe my cat. But the records were for me to pick up and to understand once I was old enough to take a sort of significant interest in learning about my heritage, and they were for me to follow, and follow I did. So thus began a decade-long family history project undertaken by my mother, Marina, and myself, using my grandmother's records as a roadmap to reconstructing our family history. Beyond my grandmother's archives, we were also privy to memoirs that were written by our relatives Ingrid and Eva Ramo, from which we learned all about the Ramo family's movements during the interwar period into World War II. And on my father's side, on the Intson side, what we know is largely passed down from oral histories, although limited photographs and documents do exist, which I also have been using to my advantage. And this past summer, we had the opportunity to go to Estonia for the very first time and visit all of the places in her photos and visit all of the homes that my family's lived in and recreate our own versions of the records, some of which were conceived over a century ago. So the name of my talk, as you saw, is Performing Remains, Photography and the Intergenerational Imagination. So when my mother and I visited all of these places with my Fujifilm camera in hand, we restaged several of the photos from my grandmother's archive in a kind of historical reperformance or reenactment as we traced our family's roots all throughout Estonia. And during this process, we thought a lot about the gendered labor of memory work. Often, in family units, as in our wider society, it's women who are traditionally the keepers of records, or librarians, archivists, teachers, so on and so forth. These are all, historically speaking, quite feminized professions. And I come from a long lineage of creative women who document and record family history. My mother was also a teacher, and in her retirement, she is a collage artist, and she's actually been using old family photos and ephemera to construct these surrealist collages that explore different aspects of her Estonian-Canadian identity and culture. And of course, I'm an artist across different mediums, but for the purposes of this, we'll say I'm a photographer and performance artist, which is how I situate myself in this work. So what I'm interested in specifically with this project is how these intergenerational practices of memory work, so my own, my mother's, and my grandmother's are conversational, are in conversation with one another. What can we learn at the intersections of my grandmother's record keeping, my mother's collage work, and my photographic performances for camera? How do these things, not alone but together, help craft a more whole and complex and nuanced portrait of our family history? And this is the exciting part, where I tell you that this project is actually going to form the basis of an exhibition that's going to be here next spring. So this is your exclusive, so this is your exclusive sneak peek of that. Keep an eye out because it's going to be cool. So you're going to see some sneak preview stuff. Okay, so first up, before I show you some of the photos and the records and our recreations of them, I'd like to put my academic hat on for a second and situate this project in some performance scholarship that'll give you some rationale behind the why of all of this. So in her book, Performing Remains, which I love, performance scholar Rebecca Schneider talks about historical reenactments as reperformances. She asks, what does it mean to perform historical remains? What can performance offer studies of history? And while she is writing in the context of American Civil War reenactment culture, which itself is absolutely bonkers, when applied to this context and this project, her work can help us understand what a reenactment is and what it does. So Schneider describes the experience of reenactment as, quote, an intense embodied inquiry into temporal repetition, temporal recurrence. So what does that mean? In academia, as in research, we typically tend to think of a research inquiry as based in fact, not feeling. And we had some of this talk when we looked at those photos earlier from that incredible book. We arrive at truths by evaluating objective facts. But what happens when our inquiries begin in our bodies, with our own subjective experiences and with our feelings? And what would it mean to literally touch time? How might that feel? And what might we learn by tracing the physical steps that our ancestors made and recreating their movements, their records, and their photos? So following Rebecca Schneider, I don't believe that historical moments are ever really that fixed. Though we can think of, for example, the occupation as having a clear beginning and end in terms of the years. Its affect can still be felt through to the present day. It still lives on in a way because we carry trauma in our minds and bodies far beyond when a traumatic event ends. And sometimes that can be passed down intergenerationally. And people may pass on, but obviously they live on through us, through our memories and through the actions that we take in this world. And as such, I see myself and I see this project as being in clear conversation with my grandmother in the way that it's bringing our familial history into the present day, into the present moment, and to relevant conversations within the Estonian-Canadian diaspora in a new way. Furthermore, Schneider writes that all bodily practice is paradoxically both the vehicle for sameness and the vehicle for difference or change. Recreating our families' steps, movements, and photos doesn't just have a political purpose, in my opinion, doesn't just have a personal purpose, in my opinion, it also has a political one. Because when my family took those steps, took the photos that we're gonna see, they were either in fear of a looming occupation or trying to survive the one that was occurring. But when we recreated these photos, we were doing so in a free Estonia, one relieved of occupation, and one that celebrates the very things that my ancestors were persecuted for and murdered for celebrating. They continue my family's anti-imperialist politics into the present day. And where my grandmother's records left remains of trauma and occupation and violence and deportation, we leave different remains of possibility, of intergenerational connection and intergenerational dreaming, and of the possibility of a thriving Estonian-Canadian diaspora, which I'm very grateful to be a part of. So, okay, enough theory chat. Let's show you some fun stuff. So I'll talk a little bit about my research process and then show you the photos themselves. But, so this is a map that I was creating leading up to our actual trip. As you can see, because I love a good color-coded map, each sort of subsection of my family represents a different color. So the Harjastes were situated sort of in and around Tallinn, mostly Nõmme. The Intsons migrated from Viljandi to Pärnu and then fled into the Baltic Sea in Pärnu when they were escaping. And then the Ramos are kind of everywhere, but they began in Jõgeva, went to Tartu, and then to Tallinn, and you can see that was their escape route through the country. You can see the red sort of going from Haapsalu to Kuressaare and then that way. And so I've been able to sort of trace the migration patterns of the family. And then so we had this map when my mom and I were figuring out where we wanted to go on our road trip, and we used it and associated certain photos with all of those places that we wanted to recreate and sort of reconstruct. Before we went overseas, I created this extensive database of documents, lists, maps, and timelines to cross-reference as we went on our road trip. Those hands right there on the left, that's my great uncle Ivar Ramo, who was talking about Tartu and the places where he lived. So when I went there, I could check it out. The internet can be a very fabulous tool, and to that extent, I was actually able to identify certain landmarks in my grandmother's photos using Google Maps and Google Street View. So my grandmother's addresses were found by me honestly looking at houses on Google Maps until I found the right one. Sometimes I had names of streets, but no house numbers. And also some of those street names had changed during the occupation, like Pioniri Avenue had become Vanna, but we didn't understand, we didn't know what the name of the new street was at first, so we really had to figure that out based on where the other historical landmarks were in that area. And so I had to get creative. And here's some screenshots of things that we had. The above screenshot with the little, the yellow line there is one sent by a relative that still lives in Esti, who remembered my grandmother visiting in the 90s and said, this is the street that the one house was on. I don't know where it is, but I think it was this street. And so Google Street View helped me take that street and find the actual house. And then this is the moment, you can see my laptop screen open on the left, where I actually found the house, and my mom and I were celebrating because we were so excited that we found the house that my grandmother was born in, and we really wanted to go. So during this process, there was one discovery that we made that was, as we say, a kind of game changer. I didn't hear much about my grandmother's dad, so my great-grandfather growing up. We only knew that he was seized by the NKVD in 1941 and that he was deported and shot in Norilsk in the Gulag in Siberia. But a few Google searches, crazy that that's all it took, showed us that he was actually a decorated and now widely celebrated colonel in the Estonian army, the commander of the Pioneer Battalion, an offshoot of the Engineering Battalion, and also the commander of the Nõmme garrison. He actually helmed the construction of a massive military training ground based on the Jägala River, where he and his family had a cottage that my grandmother visited a lot as a child. And there are tons of photos of them at this cottage surrounded by military men that worked for her father. Crazy. And his life has been now extensively chronicled in Estonian history books and on museum websites and in collections databases. He was kind of a big deal, and we had no idea. And because of that, my grandmother grew up a lot more well off than we knew. She lived such a modest life here. I mean, she worked as a house cleaner and never let on that she came from a family of status. But then, of course, we understood why the NKVD wanted to seize him. He was a very outspoken Estonian nationalist. But with this discovery, a whole other world of stories, images, and ephemera kind of opened up as we learned more about the Pioneer Battalion that he was the head of. I realized how little I knew about one of the women that raised me, and I was determined to find out more. So this is the part where I just show you some of the photos and describe what they are. So this is my mom and I in Haapsalu, which is actually where my grandmother, who is this one here, and her mother, who is here, used to go on mother-daughter trips. And so we thought that it was only fitting to start our mother-daughter trip also in Haapsalu, where they used to go. But this is the craziest story, so I just told you about Johan Harjaste. When we came into Haapsalu, when we came into Nossi-Plats, the very first thing that we saw on our trip, and we couldn't believe this, was a giant mural, and his face is actually this one here. It's the Italian Army Regiment in the First World War. Italian, did I say Italian? Estonian, I'm so sorry. I'm thinking about pizza. And so this photo is candid. It's my mother realizing that her grandfather is up on that wall and seeing his name there. And she went up to it and she's like, that's my grandfather. And so I took that photo, which was, we couldn't believe that this was the first thing that we saw upon coming to Estonia. That's just wild to us. This is another one. This photo up here is of the Haapsalu Jam taken in 1941, the station. And this is from my great uncle's memoir, where he wrote about the whole family, the Ramo family's journey through the war. And he's talking about in Tallinn, they were looking for a way out as the Soviets were coming in 1944, and no trains were coming, and they were sleeping on the platforms, and bombs were going off here and there, and they thought that they very well might not make it off the platform. But, so he says, flames lit up the sky here and there, explosions shattered the quiet of the night, nearly blinding us on the platform. My great uncle, Iva, he is a poet, let me tell you. Our family members were the only people left, still waiting for a miracle. At 8:45, the station master announced a train to Haapsalu heading our way, but my father was not there. I took off towards our home to find him. I ran full steam. Finally, he came into view. Thank God we made it in time. Thinking back, I have often wondered if I can ever be grateful enough in my own heart to fully express my gratitude to God for the arrival of this train. Acting completely on their own initiative, 2 captains had put this train together from abandoned freight cars in Tallinn. They had bribed a locomotive engineer to run it. We have never found out the names of these 2 captains who actually saved and changed our lives so dramatically. Only by their initiative we were able to escape just barely in time from the invading Russian forces. So that wild story about my great uncle and his family, but also my grandfather's family, fleeing. But we went to that station where they ended up, which ended up being a life-saving expedition. And now it's a museum. It's not a functional station anymore. And this is the map in my great uncle's memoir that I just read from, where he shows us what the escape route was. They came down from Tallinn to Haapsalu, through the islands, through Kuressaare, and then left to a German displaced persons camp that way. And then this is a recreation of, so these photos are of my grandmother and grandfather sailing from Kuressaare to Germany, and then eventually sailing to Canada. And so this is my mom and I on a ferry on our way to Saaremaa, now across a free Estonia. And so we thought, you know, comparing these photos, one is escaping and one is coming back, a sort of beautiful return in Technicolor. And also I just personally love this photo of my mom. This house belonged to my father's side of the family. It is now, this one actually, I didn't have to do too much research to figure out where it was because we knew the lore. My grandfather had passed away when Estonia was independent again, but his sister was alive. And so she went through the process of getting the house back, as we know those reparations. And so she got this house back, but then immediately sold it, and it became a hotel, which is now a villa in Pärnu called Villa Inge. If you can look it up, it exists. So that's the house now. We were able to go and get a tour of it. And so that's where my grandfather was raised. That's where he grew up, and we were able to see the house. And that's me posing underneath the sign. And Inge is my great aunt, who I grew up around. It's my grandfather's sister. And it's named in her memory because she was the last person to live there who was alive. And then that's a picture taken of the backyard. And one of the best stories that is in our family history is that right before that family fled, my great-grandfather Paul, my grandfather's father, buried the Estonian flag deep in the backyard somewhere, just as a, you know, to the Russians. And it hasn't been found, to the best of our knowledge. So that flag is still somewhere in this backyard, but we don't know where because the house has undergone renovations. And the landmark he told us it was close to no longer exists. So, but it was pretty cool knowing that that flag was still there in that villa, which you can visit and stay at if you go to Pärnu today. This is my grandfather here, and this is Inge, who the villa is named after, on the beach in Pärnu in the 40s, and this is a photo of some children playing on the beach in Pärnu when I was there. Also, these were recreations of some photos I found that were of the Nõmme area in the 40s. Some of these were taken by my grandmother's family, and some were accessed through the Estonian National Media Library. And so these are some comparisons of what it looked like when my grandfather was the colonel there, the commander of the garrison, and then what it looked like when we visited there so many years later. So this would have been 1940 to 44, these black and white photos, and then this is now. Thought that was a pretty cool one as well. Yeah, it's my mom. Obviously it's been cleaned up and touristized, I don't know how it's made good for tourists. The crocodile statue in Nõmme. Yeah. The tower as well. Same angles. And then this actually was where the military barracks were, where my great-grandfather worked and what he oversaw. And so this picture was the building of those barracks in 1941. This we found through the Estonian Media Library. And then this is the remains of what is there in that area, which is in a sort of closed-off, secluded, fenced area today. And this statue, the lion statue in Lovie Park, is a representative of a ceremony in which the mayor of the city gave my grandfather a flag with a lion on it to symbolize the good cooperation between the Nome government and the military. And so there's this big ceremony, and that's my grandfather being handed, my great-grandfather, sorry, being handed the flag. And so the symbol of the lion being the symbol of the Pioneer Battalion, and it's cool to see it still being memorialized in Nome, that we could go see when we were there. Nome Station, picture from 1944, and then pictures from now. This is a picture that, thank you, Grandma, showed us exactly the house where she was born in. I went to Google Maps, and I was able to find that exact house. And that's my mom in front of it there. And that's the screenshot that my relative sent me, being like, she said it was this street. And actually, this is a really lovely story, but yeah, that's a comparison of my grandmother's photo and my photo of the same house. Obviously, it's been renovated, as have many of the homes in Nome, but it is the same 1930s architectural style, which is really cool to see. But when we went there, the family that actually currently lives there was having lunch in the backyard, and they invited us in, and we got to share memories and share our photos with them. And so now we're in contact, which we thought was really lovely. And just thinking that we were having lunch in the backyard where my grandma ran around as a kid before the occupation was something pretty special. And then this is the second house where they lived, where a lot of military activity happened. The street was Pioniri for, it's now Vanna. That took us a while to figure out. We actually didn't find this house until we were in Estonia, because it was quite difficult for us to locate. And then this is a photo that was taken in 1995. We think that's one of my grandma's old boyfriends who took this photo for her and sent it back. Oh, she had lots of suitors back in the day, so we think that that's who that is. And then this is the recreated photo of my mom in front of the same house in 2014. Yep, a comparison of the homes. Again, in the same architectural style. But the house had been turned into 8 small apartments instead of being one house, and that is a relic of the Soviet era. It's the sort of collectivization mentality. And then that's my great-grandfather working in an office also in that house, and my grandma in the beautiful garden there, who I still think looks a lot like me. And we did go inside, and this is my mom making funny faces. And we also did meet one of the tenants of that house as well, who came down to talk to us. And so now we're in contact with the tenants of that home, sharing our family history. And so we're all understanding the history of this building together. Very, very cool. And then I'm ending on my personal favorite. So this photo was taken at Yagala Falls in 1924. This right here is my grandma. She was 3 years old at the time, and she's marked herself with a little blue X, so she knows which one she is, as if we wouldn't know. We know what she looked like. So this is the recreation of that photo on the same rock an exact century later, so 1924 to 2024. And I'm sitting on the same rock that my grandmother did when she was 3. And this is my grandmother waiting in Yagala Falls in 1936. Here she is in 1934, and then here are the photos of the falls that I took when I was there. Yeah, so it was really the fact that it was an exact century later that we were able to recreate those photos, we thought was pretty cool. So that's kind of it that I have to share for now, but I've got lots of other pictures from Tartu and Diriandi and other things to share, but you can come see it at VEMU next spring, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Do you have any questions, maybe? Yeah, okay, I'll come with the mic.
Thank you, very cool. I was just wondering, are you aware of the Estonian site called Ajapaik?
No,
that is
not.
dedicated to exactly this recreating photographs?
Yes, actually, yes, yeah, I did come
Are you
across
going
that,
to
yeah.
contribute your pictures to this site as well?
I should. I should, yes. You know what, I actually just became aware of that recently. to be completely honest with you, I just finished organizing and compiling all the photos. Like that process just ended in time for me to do this presentation. So we also want to reach out to the Noma Museum because we have a few artifacts that might be of interest to them, and maybe submit some of the photos to the National Media Library. So we're definitely trying to think of what to do after. But I think this was just such a beast to get all of the photos together, also to scan everything and match them all up. So it's been quite a huge task that's been of my summer. But yeah, definitely, we're trying to figure out a lot of different ways we can maybe share the material after. Yeah.
Any other ideas Camille could use? Maybe next time.
You can come talk to me after too. So
Yeah, looking forward to your exhibit here next year. Thank you. And thank yous. There are so many thank yous to give and say. First, all the presenters from far and near. Thanks to everyone who shared their personal stories, experiences from so many different viewpoints. It really has been very enriching, and I think it all gives us hope that we do remember and we care, and that's what's most important. Many thanks to our partner, Chair of Estonian Studies, Andres. Big thanks to our sponsors, our major funder, Estonian Foundation Canada, Estonian Center Council in Canada, Tartu College, our money machine here, and kudos to my team. Orav had a great idea. We should end this event here with a group photo of those who are refugees or descendants of refugees. So I think we should gather in front of the hall here. Monica, what do you think? We'll take a picture like this. Or do you want them at the screen? We can prepare.
Maybe in front of the screen.
At the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. And tomorrow, don't forget, those who know Estonian language and who doesn't, you are still most welcome to join our tomorrow's event. We celebrate Baltic College 54th anniversary, birthday. Tina Kirs will give a lecture in Estonian this time. We will have a reception. The official part starts at 3 p.m. Reception starts at 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. We have a music with Välisvesti Muusika. Erik Laar will come and play old LPs and tell the stories. Erik Kreen and Erik Laar both will play their own compositions, which are inspired by Välisvesti culture. And we end everything with sing-along with laulmine. Andres, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Berit.
Thank you. Okay, please gather here before the screen and let's take a group photo. All boats welcome, not just restaurants.